Okay, welcome everybody. Um, Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are joining us from on this lovely day. My name is Kara Vinson, and I'm a knowledge translator with the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment. Um, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's session, which is a presentation from the Garnet Families Interactive Series. So welcome. Just a few quick things before we begin. I would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which today's event is being hosted. Um, SIPCERT acknowledges the importance of the land we each reside upon. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in honoring relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples that call this nation home. So please join us in considering how we each in our own way can move forward in a spirit of reconciliation. A tiny amount of housekeeping. Please note that in today's session, attendee microphones and cameras have been muted to eliminate some background noise. The session is being recorded and will be made available online shortly after the session. We have a packed agenda today, so I'm not certain there will be time for audience questions, but if you do have a question, we welcome you to place it in the Q&A box that you'll find in your Zoom controls. And if there isn't any time to address questions, then perhaps our presenters can follow up with you after the event. And finally, this event will be presented in English with the option of translation in French. So please follow the link that we'll place in the chat if you'd like to make use of our French translation platform. And now I'm very happy to turn this over to Garnet Families and our wonderful host, Lisa Delaney. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks so much, Kara. I'm Lisa Delaney, and I'm the Community Development Director of Garnet Families. Thank you all for joining us today for this discussion on sleep health for Garnet families. So that includes military and public safety families. Sleep and families is a topic that families, service providers, and organizations have really brought forward as an area they would like to know more about. So in response, we've brought together this wonderful panel of members of Garnet Families, and they're going to focus on moving the conversation from individual experience of sleep to really understand that broader impact of sleep in families. So I'd like to introduce Marilyn Cox, Research Associate, who will moderate the discussion, and Doctors Heidi Cramm and Linna Tam-Seto, both occupational therapists, researchers who focus on military and public safety families, as well as being PSP family members themselves. So over to the three of you.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. I want to start by thanking everybody for being here. What we're hoping to do today is, as Lisa said, start a conversation about sleep health of PSP and the impact on their families. We hope to draw attention to this issue, share what we're learning, and think about what comes next. We're joined by Dr. Heidi Cramm and Dr. Linna Tam-Seto. Both are researchers whose work has helped shape how we understand the experiences of PSP. And they also bring personal experience to this work as PSP spouses themselves. That perspective adds something valuable to how they approach the research. The topic we're discussing gets complicated. The sleep health of PSP isn't just about individual well-being. It's about occupational health, family life, and of course, public safety. But before we start unraveling all of those layers, I want us to think about sleep health and what it means. It's not just about how many hours of sleep someone gets. Many of us strive for that magic 6 to 8 hours of sleep, but it's about having a sleep wake cycle that actually restores you physically, mentally, and emotionally. It's about quality, consistency, timing. For PSP, that kind of sleep is hard to come by. Their sleep is often fragmented thanks to rotating shifts, high stress environments, and a hypervigilance that doesn't shut off when the shift ends. And the consequences go beyond just feeling tired. Sleep disorders like insomnia, sleep apnea, and shift work sleep disorder are not only common, but they're also linked to burnout, PTSD, and slower reaction times. Long-term poor sleep health also raises the risk of serious health issues and workplace injuries, which is why fatigue management is essential. So we can see that there's research on PSP sleep and how it affects individual health and performance, but the family context has been missing. We haven't focused on how poor sleep health can ripple through the household, how it affects partners, children, routines, relationships. Families often feel the strain from having to adjust their own sleep schedules and also navigating the fallout of disrupted routines and heightened stress. It is a shared burden that is deeply felt, but it's largely overlooked. So the goal of this discussion is to bring families into the picture. We're applying a family-centered lens to PSP sleep health. We want to understand how these challenges reverberate through family systems and how we can better support both PSP and their families. So with that framing in mind, let's turn to the researchers who are at the forefront of this work, Dr. Heidi Cramm and Dr. Linna Tam-Seto. They've not only studied these dynamics in depth, but they've also lived them. Their dual lens as researchers and PSP spouses give them a unique vantage point on what sleep disruption really looks like. So Heidi and Linna, could you share a bit about your own family experiences that led you to study PSP sleep health? Was there a turning point or a situation that made you realize this isn't just our family's experience, this is something that needs to be researched and understood? Maybe we could start with you, Heidi.
I think as an occupational therapist and as a researcher, as a longtime spouse of a career firefighter, I think sleep has always just kind of been like a character in our story. So when you think about how the family has evolved from just me and my husband to, us both getting jobs and, starting to work and having kids and the sleep cycle and how we've managed the demands of the sleep and the logistics that come downstream of that, they're just always present. So those impacts have changed over time and how we manage them have changed over time, but it really is like an enduring element of the kind of day-to-day about of just like life in the home when you have these kinds of demands with your work and the kinds of disruption to sleep. So I think it really became very clear to us when we were even developing PSP net families that sleep is one of those things of like how do we actually manage this and what do we actually know about it. So this was part of that, as you say, like the dual lens is like we know this is happening here, but what do we know from the research world and how do we kind of bring that collective experience and the research experience closer in line. How about you, Lena?
I like how you started that sleep has always been there. It's like another character in our family story, right? So all the activities of family have been sort of included sleep as this character, but that character and the role that it's played has evolved over time. One of the things that I think has been I think for so long it's sort of been there and had never really paid attention to its presence and the commonality that it has in all PSP families. Really, it was something that, my family has just adapted, and we've, have just always accepted as a factor in how we run our lives. And it wasn't until speaking to you specifically that I realized as a researcher and as a PSP family member that it's a universal experience for families like ours, and has really sort of just shifted how I understand sleep, not just as a family member, but as a researcher, and in particular as an occupational therapist, where we look at activities that individuals and communities and groups and families that need to do, have to do, want to do, and how that gets impacted by the nature of the job. So I really think that, that dual lens of, just being, a family member who's always had sleep on, my radar, understanding how much it impacts the ebb and the flow of my family pattern in life, to really understanding that this is something that we need to better understand, not just as an individual who sleeps, but that it's, as we've talked about in the past, a co-occupation, something that that affects everyone in, not just, even the household. It goes beyond.
Yeah, and if I can just jump back in the way if you think about the adaptations, you say like the family's kind of adapted, right?
Yes.
So if you think of in the early days, oh, he worked a 24 on a Friday night and he's going to work another one on a Sunday. What do I do with the kids on Saturday morning when he needs to come home and sleep? And how then do I structure family life as kind of responsible for, you know, how to get them out of the house, but then how do I manage the dogs? And if the dogs are going to bark at the dogs next door who like to bark urgently and activate all the dogs in the neighborhood. So then you're trying to think about what's the best place, even from working from home. Is it better if I work from home so I can manage the dogs while he's sleeping? Or is it better if I leave the house and the dogs are doing who knows what when I'm not here, even now? So you've got it from such a just like pernicious isn't the right word, but it's just this constant kind of new variable also. It's definitely not static. It doesn't stay like this is how you manage it, because it does change quite a lot as my needs and sleep change, the family composition changes through our life cycle. Yeah, there's a lot there.
And COVID.
Oh.
Really, right? And everyone who's at attending this, understands sort of how COVID had, in lockdown really impacted what that sleep looks like. Just when you think you got the family in a pattern, everyone
Hmm.
is stuck at home, right? There aren't even the
Hmm.
breaks of, if there are children that
Hmm.
have to go to school, or, you're off to your job, it becomes everyone's you know, in the same space. Sleep must happen. It's going to look different for the PSP on top of
Hmm.
stressors of being active and engaged during a pandemic. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that is another layer that we've all sort of had to live through, and it's really sort of pushed sleep on the forefront, I think, for you and I, Heidi, like in terms of, research priorities. What do we know about
Hmm.
these?
And then starting to look at, what is known. And sleep certainly is a priority within the public safety community. Like we see just how important it is and how much attention's being brought to how do public safety, given the nature of the demands of work, how do they manage their own sleep? But to think that people sleep separate from the context of the family and homes where they share these, most people live with someone, whether it's a cat, a dog, a fish, or other humans. And so how do you balance these competing demands for activity? So like Marilyn, you had said, trying to find that sleep wake cycle that's restorative for you might actually be in direct conflict from, the energy of the family. So and what's going on with the kids? Like I had two boys, they're busy boys. So, let's all be quiet for 5 hours while daddy sleeps. How do you do that well? And where does he sleep? So all the different permutations that we've had in our in the couple of houses that we've lived in about where is the daytime sleeping place. It makes me think, you ever watch these like, home renovation places that, love it or list it kind of thing? There was this show where they renovated a firefighter's home, and she thought she had this great idea because she renovated the basement because you don't really need that guest room and it's all great. Look at all this open. And they came in and the wife was like, this is where he sleeps in the day. Like, he needs to be separate from the family so the family can do its thing, and he needs to sleep. This is not acceptable at all. You cannot do this. And just the level of like, I had not even thought about that. And she was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. As it's also dramatized somewhat, but it's true. I'm like, yeah, you can't take away that sleeping den wherever it is in the house. That has to be structured in. And so during COVID, when the doorbells are happening and everybody's online and there's, everybody's eating during the day multiple times. So there's activity, footfall, murmurs, in
Yes.
headphones. It's different for someone who's trying to tune out and engage in that restorative sleep. It's amplified, we say the lifestyle dimensions during COVID were really amplified, intensified, and magnified. And sleep was one of those pressure points.
Linna, maybe you could speak to that a little bit too, is how families adapt and respond, either from your own experience or what you've been hearing from other PSP families.
Yeah, it really, sleep does permutate and shift and change throughout, right? So, I mean, putting COVID aside, just thinking about the life course of families, of individuals, right? So you get to, Heidi, lovely job illustrating, when you and your partner first got together, it was just you having to deal with sleep. And then maybe there was a dog. And then you bring in small people who have different sleep patterns. And what does that look like, right? My partner had a head injury, and at the time, best practice of managing head injury was, quiet, right? So he was off, but I had small children at the time. How do it's not even just getting sleep, it's the recovery because of an injury that, is very characteristic of this line of work. So the demands change of the family, and how do you accommodate for sleep? So with young children, they go to bed early, you could go to bed early. Now I have teenagers. And if anyone's, lived with a teenager, their sleeping looks very different. So it is, you know, you need to be quiet because it's this time, and your father needs to sleep, but we know that you're going to be up, and by the way, you can't have your friends over at this time because, right? So it not just affects the individual, but how the entire family system evolves, and having to constantly adapt for that. And it's never we have a pattern, we've got a routine, we have a routine for the moment, right? And it's okay. And that's the thing that we don't quite understand, is how the other family members are orchestrating their lives around this, because we know how important sleep is and the demands of the job. So it's complex and it's layered, and I think that's one of the things that we've discovered so far, is that it changes through a life course perspective. Things change, patterns change, and it's this constant need, and a lot of the times it does fall on the family to negotiate that. And it's this constant negotiation that goes through and doesn't end. And I don't expect it to end upon retirement, because then that you know life after service, there's a whole other set of issues that come up that's unique to that experience. um Heidi?
Oh,
Yes.
well, I'm remembering things that I hadn't even thought about in, coming into the conversation today. And, one of the things is just how limited awareness there is about like how big a presence it is from people who don't live this kind of lifestyle. So we used to have these like magnet kind of decal things that you'd stick up when he needed to sleep. Like, so you put on the front door, like shift worker, please don't ring doorbell. And people would come up and see that and bang on the door and ring the doorbell. And you're like, like, come on, right? And it's like, we actively put that up there to try and say, have some grace here. Like, find a different way. But people would disregard that actively. So we stopped using it because there was just like people would just ignore it, which we thought was, we didn't feel good about that being ignored because we're trying to manage it at home. But
We
I
would
think,
just
Linna,
discard the doorbell.
oh, well,
We
there's one way, but then there's still bang,
Yes.
you can, so yeah, you can undo the doorbell, like just disconnect the circuitry. There is no doorbell now. There's no more doorbells. I mean, that would be one way. But the other thing in terms of that, the shape of sleep and kind of, the impacts is that it's not just about sleep, it's about the rhythm. So if you work for a 24-hour shift and you come home, you're going to be naturally pretty discombobulated. Do I eat now? Do I sleep now? Like, what does my body need? Like, you are at work for 24 hours and, you're working for 24 hours. Maybe you get to occupy a bunk in a state of restful awareness, resting in a state of wakefulness. So you're not really sleeping, even if you get to lay down for a couple hours. But really, you're on the go for 24 hours. Your body physiologically is, ugh. You come home, you're not sure, you're trying to reset it, you go to sleep. So let's say you sleep for 3 or 4 hours, you get up, maybe eat. So now you've eaten maybe, let's say 2 o'clock. Do you want to eat dinner or supper, whatever you call it, depending on where you're from, at like 5:30? Because you just ate breakfast at 2:30. So even the awareness of like, oh, other people need to eat dinner, like the kids are going to be like, what's for dinner at 5 o'clock? And you just ate breakfast. So like it just changes the whole rhythm. And so if you think that on the 24-hour shift, you're either working 7 days out of a 20 cycle, you're working for 7 of them, you're recovering for 7 of them. So that's 50% of the time that you're not thinking about dinner at home at a minimum. So the rhythms, the routines, the responsibilities, and how they get distributed have to adapt to those realities as well.
So our family went through a period of time where shift work, and they were playing around in the service that my partner's with. They were playing around with let's try a new schedule. So we're going to shift the entire service. We're going to play around with some different odd times. And so that also threw the rhythm off, right? And that was also around the time when the children were trying to, establish bedtimes and that sort of thing. So again, it's shifting family functioning that is dictated, that is beyond the control of us as a family, right? Even, the kids sleep, it just is this shift in the patterning and the routine. So yes, dinner is, it's a meal, but that dictates when sleep happens for the individual, but also the rest of the family, and for those of us that are trying to manage that protected sleep time. And it changes, right? It changes because of, organizational demands, but also changes, and I can't, stress this enough, with the rhythm of the way families evolve. People come, people go, and I'm not even including those living outside of a household, right? Um, you know, family events, community events, getting together with friends is very much dictated by the need to protect sleep.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one of the things that you raised there, Linna, is just how with you think you have a kind of sorted out, and then it changes, maybe the role changes or the organization changes. So like where we are, they've done 3 completely different 20 28-day cycles. And when the kids were little, he would work a 10-hour Saturday, a 10-hour Sunday, a 24-hour Sunday, and then a 14-hour Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, known as the long shift. So this was like some version of hell with a baby and a 2-year-old to try to manage that. And that, when do you think they're going to have an ear infection or a sore throat? It's going to be on the long shift when you're managing that for 7 days. And that really is like, it's not an easy thing. And I don't think that we have given enough kind of space and acknowledgement to look at the combination of like the logistics of sleep, the influence of sleep in the shape
Yes.
of shaping kind of family life,
Yes.
and the conversations that we can have to try and in some of our previous conversations, I love the way Linna had framed it in terms of, it's not uniquely mine, but it's unique to me, that kind of framing of, and I think that's part of when we look at the Garnet family lifestyle dimensions and why they seem to be resonating so well with people is that they give that kind of validity to this is a shared phenomenon that we're all experiencing. It looks different in my home than it does in Lena's home at different points in a day. But we're both struggling with it and trying to come up with how our family can adapt to it um, well, given the structural realities of this is the nature of the job.
Thanks. That really shows how what you're saying is how this whole sleep issue, it's really hidden until people start talking about it. It's there,
Mhm.
but it's the elephant in the room. Nobody's really addressing it. So I want to shift gears a little bit here now and introduce a few guiding principles that help us better understand and respond to the broader family impact. Um, research tends to leave us with more questions than answers, is what we've seen. Families, Lisa mentioned this in the beginning, families really made it clear to us that sleep is a research priority. She hears it a lot at events when she asks them what they want to know more about. But when we went looking for answers, the literature was nearly silent on the family experience. Last summer, a group of occupational therapy graduate students did a scoping review on PSP sleep health. They found research on occupational factors and individual health consequences, but almost nothing on how sleep disruptions affect families. Now, Linna, I know you led a similar study at the University of Toronto, and you came up with some different insights because you introduced military families into your study. Can you talk a little bit about what you found?
Yeah, thanks, Marilyn. So I had the pleasure of working with two occupational therapy students, just Jessica Hatch and Rebecca Mendoza, who were helping with this around understanding sleep and PSP families. And the way we defined sleep, PSP families is, broadly around, the first responders, but also military and veterans. And we took a slightly different approach to it. We looked at it through an occupational therapy lens. So looking at how sleep is an activity that will impact, the individual and families. But yes, there wasn't much that was found. The research that's out there is really among spouses and caregivers. So that sort of individual singular relationships rather than a unit. Really, when they were looking at sleep, it was really about, sleep issues as sort of a secondary outcome to the study. They weren't focused specifically on understanding sleep. It was whatever the issue was, but then, oh, by the way, sleep was also affected. To what extent, we don't know, because they sort of, just identified that sleep was affected. So, I mean, there's various, aspects of sleep that we were hoping to uncover but didn't. We wanted to see if the researchers identified, the nature of the sleep, the quality, sleep environment, any of those factors that might play a role in what sleep looks like in these families. But sadly, like you had concluded, Marilyn, that there isn't anything out there. We know that sleep is impacted by, mental health injuries and illnesses as a result to work. Things like anxiety connected to post-service challenges or public image do impact sleep, but the studies rarely looked at sleep itself. It was always, the result of something else. So what it really highlighted is to us is that, there is some work that we can make inferences to, but there is certainly not the family sleep research that we need to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like you use different criteria and introduced military personnel, but you came up with similar, the same issue that families are deeply affected because you can see that, but they're rarely in the center of the studies.
It's
If
always and families.
yes,
That's a
yeah,
lot of the framing is like and spouses, and it wasn't even families and spouses and caregivers, which goes to, a whole other issue about,
Yeah.
it's the family's responsibility to care for.
Yeah, responsibilizing the family and the focus on caregiver and support roles. And
Yes.
what's missing is the support for the family as a whole.
Yes. What about me? What about me in my sleep?
This is it. And so I think for those who haven't followed some of the other virtual events, one of the early ones that we looked at was around where do families fit in suicide prevention, and this and families kind of like as an add-on. Families were either like risk or protective factors, like they might mess with your sleep, or they might really work hard to protect it, as a kind of comparison to how we might see the same categories of where families fit. So they might be risk or protective, or they might be, responsibilized, as Marilyn says. But the centrality of families in these occupational sectors is not there. And I mean, they're occupational sectors. We can't expect families to be at the center. So that's where it's important to have these conversations where we put the families at the center of it, and we look at how families matter in their own right, not just as kind of, derivatives or dependents of or caregivers of, but people are in these families, and like the people who are doing these jobs need to sleep, right? So there is a balance between them wanting to sleep and where they sleep and being able to be like fully participating in their homes. So we start to take that ecological perspective of sleep, which for some reason in the sleep field, based on our conversations with other sleep researchers, where that's their primary, it seems to be that the kind of family, the ecological perspective is there when you're talking about sleep in children. So you see how there's this, bi-directional, multi-directional impacts of sleep. If you have a child with a sleep disorder, the parents are going to be very sleep deprived, how that works. But when people turn kind of 18, the apps, the training, all the stuff around like improve your sleep is very much focused on you as a human. And that kind of context of like who's in your home, what's their sleep wake rhythm, um, doesn't seem to really be there. So being able to pull out, and this isn't the first study where we've had to look at those inferential pieces for families, because we have to say, okay, well, this is what's happening, but what does that mean for families? How do we pull that forward and bring the families from behind to kind of maybe even beside? And for our purposes, as the Families Matter research group, really trying to look at, let's understand families themselves. So I think that's really important. And I think, Marilyn, the work that you've been leading around applying these kinds of principles of family centeredness to the body of work around sleep has just been such an important thing. And I'm delighted to see that article out,
Yes.
where people can start to think about it. Like, oh, I hadn't thought about it in that way. Guess what? Nobody else has really either. So like join us and read that, because it's really broadening how we've come to think about sleep within these populations.
Okay, so that's a great opportunity for me to bring this framework in here, because we really wanted something to follow that was family inclusive. So one of the tools we've been using is the family impact framework. It's not actually new. It's been around for a while. It's by Bogenschneider and her colleagues, and they introduced it in 2012. But we found it very useful. It's a way of staying accountable to families as whole systems, and by asking how policies, programs, and practices affect families, not just the individuals within them. So the framework takes into account 5 key principles: family responsibility, family stability, family relationships, family diversity, and family engagement. And these principles offer a clear and practical way to assess the impacts on families. They help us focus on relationships, plan for long-term stability, and support families in everyday inclusive ways. Now, Heidi and Linna, maybe you can help ground these principles in PSP sleep in everyday life. One of the principles is family stability. Heidi, how does sleep health affect stability in PSP households?
Well, I think stability generally, looks different in PSP households, because we're not operating on the same kind of 24-hour cycle. So I operate kind of on an academic cycle, which is also not particularly standard, right? So, it's not like a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday thing. So I've got a bit of a amorphous work cycle myself. And then, he's got a 28-day cycle. And so for us, stability is trying to meld those two in a way that we have to look at it in chunks. So what's this, what's coming here, what's coming there, because you can't really get too far out on how to balance the logistics. But there's a lot of conversations around logistics. So it's like, okay, so, when are you sleeping? What else do you have on the go? How do we kind of adapt the day? Because the balance is always trying to say, when you're here, we want to make sure that you're fully integrated rather than just kind of living in these parallel streams of like different kind of temporal cycles, because you can drift. So you have to be intentional in having the conversations ahead of time, because if you're having them as they're happening, that tends to be kind of a destabilizing force. So I think there's a lot of project management of just, what does this week look like?
I think project management is the best way to describe the role that I take on in
Yeah.
sort of balancing everything. So as you're talking, I'm in, as we are doing this, we are currently in the evening shift cycle where, a later start in his day and means a later end in his day. But I need my sleep, so I am often asleep by the time, right? So there isn't that connection point. And then, then I'm off to my day. So there is a period of time where we don't connect. And if you try to do the project management during this period of time, it does become destabilizing. So it is very much at the beginning. And this is all stuff that no one has taught me, no one has talked to me about, but I've had to sort of learn on the job in order to sort of keep the household running, right? And, you know, and that's another thing that we don't know enough about. So, most of the research that's out there is around families similar to you and I, right, Heidi? Like, our makeup, just, um, heterosexual couples, couple of kids, that is sort of the quote unquote norm of what research is done. What we need to do is, as we know, the definition of family is very different, and we don't know what that looks like in other types of families.
Well,
So,
and dual serving
oh yeah,
folks in particular, like, you think, regardless of your family composition, if you have two members in the family who are both in these kinds of roles, then that's a big amplifier as well on how you manage that. And where do you find those moments of reconnection, and to really think about those eh, very in a very prioritizing kind of way, because they're not as available, they're not as regular as they would be for folks who are running more 9 to 5, Monday to Friday kinds of schedules.
so we have the dual service families,
Hmm.
so have
Yeah,
the single parent families. We have them
the lone parent.
generational families. We have
Yes.
families where they're not intimate partners but roommates,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
So there's all sorts of, combinations of like household living that we know nothing about. And the
Oh yeah.
the role these other families need to take on to project manage.
So Lena, that brings me to family diversity, because that's one of the 5 principles. And how do we manage that when we have, like you said, lone parent, we have blended families, we have multi-generational families, we have culturally diverse families. How do we manage all of that? And so that we don't do a one size fits all solution. Because
Absolutely. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but yes, I think that's sort of the question in all family research is like how we traditionally family research has looked at a certain makeup, a certain definition of what family is. And it's a starting point, right? We need to start somewhere. That happens to be the starting point. What can we do is first acknowledge that all families, all households are impacted by sleep. I think that's the first step. It was the first step for me, is validating that experience that, you know, my roommate is a paramedic. Yeah, my life is impacted by, you know, when they sleep, when, you know, how I navigate my life in this home. I think it's the first step is sort of acknowledging that all people within a household are impacted by sleep, because sleep is not a solitary, you know, activity per se. It's everything else that comes out of sleep. Um, so I think the first step is sort of acknowledging that people are impacted, that it's a system. We need to take a systems approach to it, and start asking the questions,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, because I mean, I look at it like it's not just what's happening around sleep disruption, but it's for whom is this happening, under what conditions, and
Yes.
with what consequences. It's the whole picture, getting that whole picture, and figuring out, you know, what will work, because what works for one family doesn't work for another family, kind of thing.
Yes, I think it's really important.
Yeah. So what I'd like to turn to now is the research agenda that we're proposing. It's one that really zeroes in on the issue, because we know that disrupted sleep is a personal health concern for PSP. But at the same time, as you've clearly demonstrated, it affects core aspects of family life. So we're working towards this research agenda that centers family, and reflects real life complexity, and also connects to policy. So the goal is to generate insights that support the systems PSP families rely on, from like healthcare to labor policy to family services. So Heidi, building on that, what kind of research questions do you think could help us better understand this issue? And where are the blind spots in the existing research?
I mean, I think there's a tremendous number of blind spots. We have much work to do in this area. As Linna says, even just like who the families are unrepresented. So there's like who the families are, where the families are in the family life course, and how that braids in with the career life course and the demands that go along with that. Um, and then it's really like, what are the options from a operational perspective for 24/7 jobs? Are there options? What are they to be able to structure shifts and shift schedules in a way that it's less disruptive on family life broadly? So sleep being part of that. So I think that's really, we're at the very beginning stages of asking those questions. Um, but I do think that there's always going to be an inherent tension in the policies when you're coming from an occupational sector that's the priority needs to be operational readiness. And so that's always going to win out on the family's kind of front, because everybody needs these folks to show up when we call them, which means they need to go to work when 24/7, doesn't matter what day, what time. So I think there's an inherent tension that needs to be acknowledged. And then when you look at how can things be supported, I mean, there are other countries. If you look at the Nordic countries, they have, you know, priority daycares for shift workers in public safety, so that there's daycare to provide this non-standard elements that includes the ability to do childcare while you need to sleep. And that is provided so that people can actually continue to do these jobs. And we just don't have anything like that structurally. And I think in an ideal world, we would have more structural supports like that, because we still need people to do the jobs. But in terms of mitigating some of the impacts, it would be, well, you know, where and how do you sleep while managing some of the logistics of your household management, which may include child or pet care or elder care.
Okay, so Lena, how can based on what Heidi said there, how can the family impact lens shape the way we approach research on sleep disruption?
I mean, I think we really need to re-examine our understanding of sleep, right? Because I mean, based on the work that, you know, you've done, that I've done, that other folks have done around sleep, it is really perceived as a solitary activity. right? So any recommendation, anything that's sort of come forward out of this research has really been around, better sleep hygiene. You need to, you need to more, the 6 to 8 hours. You need to, have a routine, all these things. And it discounts the context in which sleep occurs. So I think what needs to happen to really sort of, adapt, the principles of the family impact framework is really understanding that sleep is not just a solitary event and taking that perspective. And I think if you make that shift in understanding what sleep as an activity should look like, I think that'll open the doors for more questions, which will, you know, inform research that will be more meaningful for the complexities of what sleep actually looks like for, families like ours.
Well, and if I can add in, I think, if we think about what we're socialized to think about where couples sleep and the couples share a bed, they share a bedroom, this is what they do, that doesn't work for everybody. And then it doesn't also work for everybody at different stages of life course. So sometimes people need to sleep separately because they both need to sleep. And so I think we also have to normalize that, where those are things that people are very apprehensive to talk about, because they feel like maybe that's a degradation of the relational quality, but really it may actually be a lifeline to support the relational quality. Because if neither partner sleeps, and one of the things we haven't mentioned is the incidence of CPAP use among folks who are shift workers. So I know, Marilyn, you mentioned the sleep disorders, but
Yes.
you have CPAP happening. That's a whole other layer of kind of noise that affects the partner's sleep. So we don't even see that really in the literature that well defined is how do partners, co-sleepers, even manage this new thing that comes into a bedroom. So how do you manage all of those things? So I think when you expand the view, there's just no end of questions. So I do think that the paper that you led here, Marilyn, on the family impact framework and applying it is just such an incredible step forward for us to be able to think more broadly. So we will share the links to that paper, and on the Garnet Families site, we will get it up there. But I think it's important that people start asking, yeah, where do families fit in sleep, and how do families fit in sleep? Whether you're a family member, whether you're someone who works in the field, or whether you're in some form of leadership, little L, big L leadership, whether you're a policymaker, is like, how do we think about this in a little bit more broad terms? Because so much of the intervention is person focused, which perpetuates the idea that sleep is a solitary activity that has no consequences to anybody else in the family, which I think works at odds to where we need to get to.
And it's
Or it's
interesting.
an insufficient, it's not the full picture, right?
And it's interesting going back to your previous point, Heidi, around, what do we know about sleep and families? It does tend to be around children and sleep disorders among children. And then it sort of, stops, right, at
Mhm.
adults. And then it's almost though families, I mean, we can safely say families aren't included in the understanding of sleep.
Well,
So
they aren't. And sleep also, when we talk about bringing families forward, sleep also, I think when we talk about the relational quality, and I'm looking at also, there's some questions in the Q&A as well. And I think that being able to look at sometimes your sleep issues and your sleep needs are different. They can be different from your intimacy needs, your connection needs. So trying to kind of pull these things apart and to try to say it can be, for some families, sleeping in separate rooms in different beds might actually be the best thing you ever do, because everyone needs sleep and restoration. And we think about, having both of the questions relate to being off work around PTSD and uninterrupted sleep and prioritizing the sleep of individuals. It can feel like a rejection of partner when that happens. But it's a prioritizing of self, because you can't really, it's kind of like, on the airplane, like it's kind of like that. you can't prioritize your relationship if you are just the walking dead from no sleep. So sleep is one of these basic Maslow's hierarchy, like you just have to have sleep to function. So where and how are the conditions for sleep available in your particular family system? And how do you take the romantic or intimate element of co-sleeping out of that physiological need for restorative sleep? So to pull those things a little bit apart, I think is an important part of where we need to get to. So I think that's very important. And I think that's part of why we want to have this conversation starter, to be able to say, um, it's not an easy conversation to have, but I think sometimes that's where it lands for folks. And that's okay. Completely.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think a big part of, the conversation today is sort of normalizing that experience, right? Is that, there is a lot of, social normalization of what sleep should be, that it's an individual, if you're a partner, it should look a certain way. But for me, it's looking at sleep as sort of holistically. Then we do need to take care of ourselves. We need to take care of our families, our household, and you just do what you need to do to sort of ensure that sleep is had, but in a very sort of ecological perspective.
Well, and with the organizational elements, one of the other questions is around, returning to shift work, having been off for, with PTSI, PTSD. And I think that is a challenge. And I think looking at prioritizing where the sleep recovery can happen when the shift work gets fully introduced, but there should be some sort of graduated return to shift work. It shouldn't just be, okay, you're back. There should be best practice on return to work says graduated return to work in all duties and requirements, one of which would be, the full shift cycle. So how you do that is a negotiation with your healthcare provider and your employer, but looking at that graduation and then thinking about where do you have a bit more say in where and how that sleep can happen in the home, and how to prioritize the sleep in the balance of what else is going on with the families.
Yeah, this is really, really important to really think about what the families are carrying, because this isn't, and I think that's what it stays hidden a lot of the time, and until we start talking about it, having these conversations and bringing it out, change is not going to happen, because the change isn't going to happen in the home, because these are these are occupational things that are making this causing this sleep disruption. So we really need to name all those things. I mean, I'm going to re-listen to this, because with everything that you've said, we can come up with a pretty good list of all the effects that the sleep disruption has on families, and start working from there, so that we can go back to the systems and say, things have to be different, because there's more. The PSP is taking this on, jeopardizing their health, jeopardizing the well-being of the family at the same time. So we just have 1 or 2 minutes left. Heidi, did you were able to see the questions that?
I think I contextualized the questions, and I didn't answer them directly, but if by chance there's still more that those people who posed it want to have more queries, just send them in. Lisa will introduce like where you can send some of those questions. We want to hear from you. We want to know, what you're trying to do with making sense of even the conversation. This is meant to be a conversation starter. What we like to do is bring some sort of research to the table. Linna and I just happen to also have that dual lens where we can speak to the way in which we know it shapes lives like ours.
So we've got about a minute or so left before we bring Lisa in here. Any last thoughts, Linna or Heidi?
Well, thanks for having this conversation. I think this is definitely, it went from, Heidi and I sitting around as a couple of friends, talking about, challenges with sleep in the house, to now, informing research questions and having a platform to talk about sleep. And it's really amazing that, you know, people are here to engage and to listen. I think the first thing is for me, is the validation of it. Is that, you know, it's my experience, but it's not unique just to me. Every
Mhm.
other PSP household has some flavor of this project management that happens constantly. So I think that's sort of, you know, the parting words that I'm gonna sort of leave with you today.
And I think we have some preliminary, you know, conversation strategy information around sleep on PSPNet Families, to be able to think about, okay, how do we think about these things? But even since we've developed PSPNet Families, we've really dug into sleep because we saw it as a community priority, and we'll continue to look at this over the next number of years. So, you know, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Heidi, and I'll let Lisa close us out.
Thanks so much to the three of you. I know that this is a top priority for families. People are and service providers looking for strategies, information, tips, recommendations. I think you've really illustrated and highlighted how sleep impacts so much of family life, and both just with people inside the home, external family members as well. Here is some of the resources that we know about, that we've developed, that others we know have developed, to give you some of those more specific strategies. And so these are all links. We will highlight this in our social media. We'll also do an infographic post-event that will carry all of these links to send you out to them. And I think keep following us. More obviously is to come. Marilyn wrote a wonderful paper. We've shared that out, the publication on social media. And as I hear more and more needs and gaps from families, from service providers, we'll host these events quarterly to keep people up to date and keep recognizing and responding to these needs. So we really appreciate everyone tuning in today, and let us know. Again, like Heidi mentioned, if we haven't answered your questions, we will follow up with you and support you in that way. So send us an email. I think that if there's any other questions in the chat, we have a quick minute to look at that, or in the Q&A. I didn't see any come in. Heidi and Linna, if you have any other closing thoughts.
I think Kara's put the links up
Okay.
for people, the ones that Lisa just shared. And so I would also encourage you, you know, if you haven't signed up, I'm not sure how people found out about the virtual event today, but we do run these with some regularity, and being able to sign up for the newsletter, for the Family Ties newsletter, there's, you know, information about this and so much more. So it's really from families like ours, for families like yours. We want to kind of bridge that research family and those who study, serve, and support them. We want to bring everybody together within the Garnet family community. So just encourage that engagement.
Yeah, and you can link onto that newsletter at garnetfamilies.com.